and welcome to the Silent Why podcast. I'm Claire Sands, and this is a podcast exploring every possible type of loss that we face in life. From bereavements to childlessness, loss of relationships, jobs, identities, expectations, futures, senses, limbs. You've lost it, we want to explore it. But not just explore it. Also see if it's possible to find hope in every sort of loss. And we've spoken to many weird and wonderful people, there's not really any weird ones, about their experience with loss and how they're navigating it and whether they've found hope. And if so, what would they want to pass on to others to give them hope? And we call these little nuggets of information Hermans. And you can check out thesilentwhy.com/Hermans for more on those if you're new to them. For those of you that listened to our episode a couple of weeks ago called Whales, Work Experience, Bitey Flies, Chips and Dave, you'll know that husband Chris and I had a week off recently and we went up north to do a couple of days work experience at a funeral director's to explore a working life that's a little closer to death than your average job. And you can hear more about how that came about in the episode that I just mentioned, and I'll put a link in the show notes. I'm also going to share about how I personally got on with seeing my first dead body during that time in a future blog. But while we were away, we also visited a very special place called the Eternal Forest, which is based in North Wales. And more specifically, wait for it, I had Jonathan from Lord Brown and Harty Funeral Directors help me learn how to pronounce where it's based, because the Welsh have kindly decided to start some of their words with PWL, and I have no idea how you wrap your tongue around that. So here goes. The forest is based in
Boduan, Pwllheli.
There. I think you'll agree, I nailed it. On arrival, we met Julia Everitt, the manager of the Eternal Forest, in the car park, and she walked us around to tell us a bit more about this woodland burial ground. And our recording from this chat is what we're going to share for this episode. For those of you that haven't come across this option for burial, I'll read you some of what the Eternal Forest says on their website. Woodland burial means becoming literally part of the wood. In death, the body is transformed into new forms of life. The physical remains of the dead are gradually absorbed by the microscopic life forms in the soil. These pass the nutrients to fungi, which in turn feed the roots of the trees. Forget the maggots and worms you've seen in horror films. There is nothing grotesque about what happens in the wood. Throughout our lives, we build complex organic molecules to create flesh. These complex molecules become available to other life forms after burial. Our ethos is respect for all life, understanding that all forms of life are linked together. Natural burials involve being buried in a natural environment like a woodland or a meadow, and this allows decomposition to happen more naturally. Everything that is buried is natural and the grave is shallower than a traditional graveyard, meaning that microbial activity happens in a more natural way, similar to composting. It's something that has been practiced for thousands of years, but it's been interrupted in our modern day by vaults, liners, embalming and other things that can interfere with the decomposition process. This was our first visit to one of these, and I have to admit I was sold on the idea immediately. There are different types of natural burial grounds, and some have been planted and created for that purpose. But the Eternal Forest is a well-established woodland that's been turned into a natural burial site, and it's all the more beautiful for it. If I lived nearby, I'd have bought my plot immediately. I've taken some photos and video of the Eternal Forest, so if you want to picture what we're talking about as we're walking around, you can find those on the website on the blog page, and I'll put a link in the show notes. And you'll have to excuse my sound man on this recording. He's usually excellent, but the cable was banging on the mic without us realising, so you might hear that a bit because I just can't remove it all. He says it's because he wasn't wearing headphones, but personally I blame his BBC journalist training. Right, so I'll hand over to Julia now to introduce herself and tell us a bit more about the Eternal Forest in
Boduan.
Hi, my name's Julia Everitt. I'm the manager at the Eternal Forest in Boduan, North Wales. This wood was set up by Arabella Melville and Colin Johnson. They both had decided after her mother's burial in a very clinical cemetery that they wanted a woodland burial. In the year 2000 he got very ill, they thought he was going to die, and Bella couldn't find any natural burial grounds in a woodland in the area. So fortunately he recovered. When he recovered, they started seriously looking for somewhere to set one up. They said, if we want it, I'm sure other people will, let's make it happen. So they found this woodland after a few years, bought it, and then thought, how can we set it up so that it continues after us? It's no good us saying we want to be buried here and then no one else is. So they then set up the charity, gifted the wood to the charity, and set it up so that it will continue for years and years and years. Colin put a lot of himself into this wood. Although he was an amputee, he used to get round on his wheelchair and then he'd get off his wheelchair, go on his hands and knees, do things, use the digger. He was very, very active. He did die a couple of years ago and is now buried in the wood. Really, it was their vision that made this all happen. And, at the time, natural burial grounds were very few and far between. It wasn't really anything that people had heard of. In the early days, they took advance bookings, which helped fund the development. And most of those early bookers are now buried in the wood. I mean, there's still some that are going strong and hopefully won't need our services for a very long time. But people having faith in the project in the early days was really instrumental in making it happen. So not all natural burial grounds are woodlands like this one. This one was an established woodland before it was bought and gifted to the charity to be a burial ground. And working around the trees does present a certain amount of problems, but it's worth it. You'll see when you walk around, the gravestones that we allow are very sort of small and not cut or polished, so they blend in. So walking around, you don't immediately realise it's a cemetery. It's very scruffy. There's lots of trees and plants, but the wildlife love it. You can probably hear the birds chirping already. We only open the car park gates if we have an event, a funeral, or if we're meeting someone. The reason for that is, it is such a nice place, and we have in the past, unfortunately, had wild campers. So anything we can do to deter that, we do. So we do keep the gates locked unless we've got an appointment. But there's enough parking for about sort of 5 or 6 cars in that little lay-by, and a pedestrian gate, so people can visit any time of the day or night. So this is a map of the wood. So I suggest we do a sort of loop of the outside, and then I'll sort of talk as we walk.
What are some of the reasons that this is run as a charity rather than as a private sort of money-making venture?
Firstly, the people that set it up, they had been stony broke in the past. They were authors, so their incomes went up and down, and they didn't want it to be just for the rich people. To give everyone an opportunity was very much in their ethos, when they set it up. These days there's a lot of, if you talk to people in the sort of business world, it's all about profit. To fight against that, I think, is a very brave thing to do. And they were very keen that it was open to all, all faiths or no faith, and to make it as affordable as possible for the vast majority of people. They need to be fully biodegradable, and we don't accept embalmed bodies or, the shiny, polished wooden coffins with brass handles that you see quite often on TV.
Because it wouldn't break down in the same
No.
way. Is it quite a difficult thing to set up because of the nature of dealing with bodies and burials? Is there a lot of regulations?
There is a certain amount of paperwork, but when I started as manager, I was surprised how little you need, really. I mean, the place has to be surveyed. We can't bury close to the stream, for obvious reasons, near to a watercourse. And you had to have paperwork to show that a person has been released for burial, to make sure there aren't any investigations going on. But other than that, it's relatively easy. I mean, you can bury someone on your own land, as long as you notify the authorities and you're not near to a watercourse. There's a procedure you have to go through, but it's relatively easy, actually.
We only ever hear about that in criminal cases.
Yes, yes. Obviously, you've got to get the right. You've got to get the right, agreement in place first. But it can be done. So as we walk up here, you'll see here is an example of what we do. In that, here's a burial site. This is slightly more recent than this one. So you can see here the grass is just starting to come back. We've done a little bit of planting ourselves. The family have done some planting, and that will continue. When we resurface the paths, we try and get as many of the plants off the path to replant them, rehome them in places like this. So here you can see it's still a little bit barren, but this one that was about 6 months before that one, you can see there's been a lot of plants coming back. We've got a little oak tree here that's self-seeded, and we gather the seeds every summer and sprinkle them around on fresh graves, so we've got all these lovely foxgloves.
Beautiful. So is there a headstone on this one?
This one has got a small stone in there.
Oh my gosh.
So we used to have more relaxed rules about headstones, but as you'll see when you're walking around, if a stone isn't painted, cut or polished, they blend in much better with the surroundings. In the early days, we didn't have quite so many rules. Some natural burial grounds don't allow any memorial stones. We think it's nice for families to have something, but we're now a lot stricter on what we allow. I mean, some of the stones that are painted and cut are quite lovely, but if you get too many in a small area, suddenly it can stop looking like a woodland and start to look more like a traditional cemetery, although we're still very scruffy compared to them. We have a commitment to people that chose us because they like the woodland nature to keep it as a woodland. So, you know, as things start to become a problem, we introduce more restrictions. When we had the COVID lockdowns, we found that people started bringing painted stones by, you know, the kids or the grandkids, and everywhere that one appeared, there'd suddenly be loads around. So we do now remove things as quickly as we can, so it doesn't encourage other people.
Yeah.
I mean, we allow cut flowers if they're not in a wrapping and they biodegrade. Anything that's biodegradable by way of flowers is fine, but if anyone wants to plant anything, it needs to be from our plant nursery. That's to keep the native species that we want to promote in the wood. We go around every summer collecting seeds. Any trees that pop up where they're not going to do well, we'll tag them up, and in the winter we'll dig them up, pop them, and then they'll be planted on people's graves the next winter or the winter after, so that we can sort of encourage the plants that are native woodland plants and discourage the ones that aren't.
So how many people do you have buried here?
Over 200, but as you walk around you'll see that there isn't a lot of sign of that. So here's another grave, and the stone there, you can see it is cut, but because it's laid flat, and that's one of the earlier ones, it's still quite discreet.
They're quite minimal with the amount of information they have on them as well. Is it just a name?
Well, the natural Welsh slate that we tend to use, you know, it does have natural flaws in it because it's not polished in the same way a traditional gravestone is. You've got to be a little bit economical with what you say. I mean, this one here, you can see the family have put a lot more words on it, and for some people it gives them comfort to have things like that on a gravestone, but often as the years go by, something that seemed appropriate at the time can become less relevant, I think, as people sort of visit over the years. But it is a personal choice, and on the larger stones you obviously can have a bit more writing.
It's a beautiful place, and if you were coming to visit somebody, it feels a lot more private because you're not looking at loads of gravestones and other people around. It's almost like it's a private space just for your person.
There are lots of little areas that really you feel very secluded in a sort of woodland setting. It's not like visiting a traditional cemetery. I'm just going to water this little tree because I know it was planted recently and it will appreciate a drop of water.
How do people make a choice whether they want to do this?
Well, that varies from one natural burial ground to another. Most families, if they find any information about us in the deceased's paperwork, they will contact us and say, oh, have they got a booking? If they have, obviously we'll know what plot they've chosen. If they haven't, we'll invite them to come and have a look, see if it's what they want, and we'll take it from there. We used to do, especially in the early days, more advanced bookings where people would come along, walk around, think, oh, that's where I want to be. We'd then make a map and record where they want to be. We also record any funeral wishes they have. So this one here, again, is a lovely stone.
Oh.
You can't see it from the... But if you come back here, you can see, and that was actually a friend of mine.
Yeah.
That was one of my first actual friends to be buried here. So,
It's a lovely stone. I love how natural it is.
yes.
With that edging like
I
that.
mean, once you see them and you can sort of see them sort of scattered around, they warm to you a bit with
You're
the more
right,
you
and
see.
You wouldn't spot them at all. You could easily walk around here and not really.
Coming around at winter is quite different. You see more
Right.
of them. I mean, you can see there's one in the distance there and one slightly closer here. So this tree was planted the winter after this gentleman was buried, and at the same time we planted this tree because this area got a little bit boggy. So having two trees there helps to soak up the water, although nowhere's soggy at the moment.
Am I right that you don't bury people quite deep?
No. So the legal requirement is to have 2 foot of earth above the top of the coffin. So we usually dig about 4 foot deep. In a more traditional cemetery, they often do double depth so that the deeper burials then get covered by a second burial at a later date. We don't do that. A couple of reasons for that. Firstly, we want the coffin to be in the active part of the soil so that the nutrients go back into the wood. You know, it's part of the ethos is that you give your nutrients that you held on to in life back to the forest. But also the equipment needed to get deep is a lot more expensive and needs a lot more skill. I'm just going to go down and water this tree. Actually, this is quite a nice little area. We call this, the nickname for this area is the crib, because you can see we've got a fallen tree here that's got loads of trees growing out from it. So it's sort of, you feel like you're in a crib. So this is a cherry tree that was planted a few months ago. There was another cherry that was planted very soon after the burial, but it didn't survive. We've had a lot of very dry summers, and you know, the young trees don't always make it. So despite our watering, it's worth putting a little bit of time and effort in to protect them. So this family, the husband's here, the wife is booked in here, and there's a bench and a bird box in his memory. And there's another grave here, that's a different family. So this family, they haven't got a gravestone from us yet, but what we do is we put these little markers, like a little bit, so it's not a grave marker, but just so that when people are working in the wood, although you still got to look for them, it shows where a grave is, because you can see the forest sort of takes them in a bit.
What's the actual work that happens in a sense of if there's a space here for this chap's wife to go in the future? Looking at the space now, it's covered in quite tall grasses and wildflowers. So is all that scraped back and then you just use tools like spades to dig the hole, or is there more to it?
We have a mechanical digger for the main part of the work, but there's a process. What will happen before the digger comes in is we will come in and by hand remove as many of the plants as we can. Anything that can be saved, unless it's a bramble, in which case we we destroy. But any other plant, flower, tree, shrub, anything, will either be put to one side to be replanted after the burial, or will be taken to one of the previous burials from a few months ago, where we need to recolonate. And what you do really depends on the weather. In the winter, you could put, if there were ferns there, you could put them to one side. And I think this one here, you can see there's lots of ferns there. I'm pretty sure we put those to one side and planted them very soon after the burial, so that it goes back to the forest. But in the dry weather, you're better off planting them straight away somewhere where they're not going to be disturbed again, and then, you know, we come around with the watering can. You know, when we go into a new area, when you're disturbing the ground, we'll tend to do a few in that area so that it can then all recover together, rather than, you know, here do one, there do other. And we have got people that have pre-booked, and they will be in their chosen plot. But for people that haven't pre-booked, we tend to do them in the same sort of area, so that the ground's disturbed, you know, just for a couple of months, and then can recolonate.
You should know your way around, don't you, to work out where all
Yes.
this is?
I mean, obviously we have quite accurate maps, and all our paths are labelled. So, but you can see here, although we've got a burial in here, we're not going to put anyone either side. So, although the actual grave is quite a small area, because of the trees, the area the family would consider their little patch is quite big. They vary around the wood. Some of them are smaller, but you don't feel like your neighbours are too close.
What sort of ages do you range from here? Is it all ages, or?
All ages. In fact, we do have a baby grove, which is just coming up here on the left, a very sad bit of the wood. I mean, for families that lose young ones, it just seems so cruel. I'm not sure how many babies we have here, but certainly in the wood as a whole, we've got about a dozen, I'd say. My friend, although they had a wake afterwards, they said at the actual funeral they only wanted immediate family and invited friends only, because they were really struggling, and they wanted it to be a small, intimate affair. But they did want the coffin lowered before they came to the grave. Right. So although I wasn't a close friend of his, I just knew him from music sessions in the pub, I was one of the people that lowered him down, and then I left before the family arrived. So I was very honoured to be able to do that for someone that I knew. I mean, it is obviously very upsetting, but it's nice to have been part of that.
Yeah.
You really do feel that you make a difference for the families, and certainly in a woodland setting like this, most people, when they leave, they have a sort of sense of relief, and it's as if the wood has sort of comforted them in some way. And when you hear the birds chirping, and even actually when it's teeming down with rain, a lot of people appreciate being in a natural environment that hasn't got that sort of clinical feel that you sometimes get in a traditional cemetery.
Well, rainfall in a thick woodland is very different to in
Yes.
the open, isn't it?
Yes.
Really? You've got a green canopy above you that shelters you to a degree, and you get these lovely drips.
So this is our plant nursery. So I'll just check for any cash. No. So we've got trees and flowers and everything here. They're all native species. So people can come along, leave a donation, take some pots. I mean, it does need a little bit of weeding at the moment, but every time I visit, my only focus at the moment is watering. We haven't got a tap, so we had to get all our water from the stream after our water trough is empty. It means taking a wheelbarrow, bringing it up the steps and bringing it down here. So it is, it's a lot of work to keep it watered when we get a dry spell like this.
So do you have people who work for the charity to help with this, or are they volunteers?
I'm the only employee. We have got people that do work for us as contractors. They've usually got other jobs and will give us a quite a good rate, but they had to fit it around their other work commitments. So it's quite a small team of people to keep it running. But we do have a volunteer day once a month, and some volunteers have no association with us other than that they want to come and volunteer. Some are recently bereaved and want to just tend to their family's grave.
Yeah.
And some people have booked for the future. So, they just like being in the wood and want to spend time here. We haven't got any problematic animals. We do get a lot of dog walkers here. We're quite happy for dogs to come along, but we've never had anything digging in the wood.
No, that's helpful.
It's helpful.
When it's this natural, it probably sorts itself out a bit. Whereas if you planted trees like you did in a field, and then you have like deer nearby or something, and they start eating them, you've got that battle to try and keep it wild.
Well, we're surrounded by farmers' fields. There's quite often sheep, sometimes cows in the surrounding fields. So we have got good fences right the way round.
Right.
We get a lot of wildlife here, as in owls, bats, all sorts of birds, mice. I'd imagine we've got rats around as well somewhere. Wow. But we haven't got anything that's destructive to the trees. If you'd been here a few weeks ago, I would have been able to show you our woodpecker nest. But it's empty now. I mean, I could show you the nest, but without the woodpeckers, it's not quite so interesting.
Incredible.
Off the wall question time. Do you get requests from ghost hunting groups and the like saying, can we come and spend a night in your woodland?
No, we haven't. We do quite often get people like yourself that for one reason or another are interested in the wood and want to do a blog, or sometimes get artists that want to come and draw things. So people do visit other than because we're a cemetery, but we haven't had ghost hunters yet that I know of. But I mean, I've been here quite often, sort of late, when it's starting to get dark, and I'm a bit nervy, but I've never felt any of that feeling here. Sometimes certain areas can make you feel a little bit uneasy, but I think here, because it's so close to being a normal woodland.
In a cemetery, it's not usually the grave, I think, at night that's creepy. It's the people who hang around them.
Possibly, yeah.
Who hangs around in cemeteries at night?
So our picnic bench there used to just have one seat, and one day another seat just appeared from nowhere, and it took months to find out where it had come from. And we'd had a bench from our car park stolen about a year before, and someone, a volunteer at a local place where they do woodworking, heard the tale of our bench being stolen, made this bench and carried it from 10 miles away. On his journey, there was a thunderstorm. He had to hide under a bush, delivered this bench and went off and never told us about it, just gave it as a donation. No
That's
other
amazing.
reason other than he liked what we were doing.
And it matches so
And
perfectly.
It does.
That's incredible.
He'd been to the wood, he'd heard about our stolen bench. He may have assumed that this was the stolen one, I don't know. But the fact that he created such a beautiful bench at great inconvenience to himself, brought it over to us for no other reason other than he wanted to be here. Not for reward or anything. I think if you set up somewhere that people feel sort of resonates with people, I think you do get people coming out of the woodwork and doing things to help. So if you were to bring cremation ashes here, you can do it two ways. You can either have a plot particularly for that, or there is a communal area where you can scatter the ashes, obviously by prior arrangement,
Right.
but not have a memorial stone. And some people will, if there's a difference in the family about what they want, sometimes you have one partner that wants to be buried and the ashes of the other put in the same plot. Sometimes people, will be buried with the ashes of their loved ones or pets.
Yeah.
There is a small wasp's nest just forming, so I think we should avoid going into the shelter.
Is this what you use to transport?
Oh yes,
the
this is the
coffins?
cart that we use to take the coffin from the car park to the graveside. So all the sides come off, so you can, we usually have one end open, slide the coffin on, and then pull it by hand around the wood. And it makes a lovely trundling sound when it goes.
I bet it does. And do you have people buried here sort of anonymously, as in there's no marking that the grave is there apart from you knowing about it?
If they've been buried in the last year, they may not have a marker, but the reason we put those stones that I showed you in is so that we always have a visual guide as to where someone is. Now they do get covered over. So these little things you might have seen around, they indicate some of the grid lines within the wood, because the wood is mapped, and we do that every few years because measuring devices get more and more accurate as time goes on. Even when you know they're here,
so it's not easy. Is it?
sometimes they're not easy to find.
And the landscape changes this month.
Actually, I know there's one here. So here is a fresh grave. I think it was last month, and here is one that was a long, long time ago. So you can see without that stone, you really wouldn't know.
They're beautiful stones.
So yes, the second batch that we ordered are a bit smaller. People being buried now, they sign an agreement to say that they will get a stone through us within a year, because the forest does reclaim the area, and if you had to fell a tree, you obviously don't want to pile it up on top of a grave, even if it isn't visited very often, out of respect. But some of the early bookers particularly asked for the grave to be unmarked. An unmarked grave in the woods is an appeal for a lot of people. So these stones, although they show there is a grave, they don't have any identifying feature.
Yeah.
So this one, if by this time next year the family haven't ordered a gravestone, we'll get another one of those to put on here. We like to keep them as cheap as we can, so that, because we sort of have a monopoly on it, because we don't want stones coming in that don't comply with the rules. So I can show you some of the blanks. So we go and collect them from a local quarry, and
Do people choose them then, or do they
yes. I mean, some people, if they're doing it from afar, they'll say, you choose it. So, they look.
Oh wow!
They don't look that impressive in the rough, but
No, I can see you can see though.
I'm an avid stone collector, so I will look for ones like this that have got.
Yeah.
That I think looks like a crocodile with an eye and we did have a gorgeous one in the shape of a harp that had just naturally, sort of broken that way, and it was stolen. I mean, like anything, they do go missing. We can't keep everything locked up. You just have to accept that you'll get some disappear. People will wander around looking for things that they can take home. But yeah, you get all sorts of shapes and sizes.
Are they sort of mostly local people, or because it's quite rare, do you get people coming further afield for this?
Mostly local. We have had someone in the last few years from Essex. They used to come on holiday to the area.
Right.
And I think originally had family in this area, but long since gone. So the family wanted his remains to be here. He used to come and walk in the mountains.
It's quite. I think it's a lovely place to be if you had somebody that you needed to bury, but you weren't going to be able to visit them. I don't know. Let's say you were in a different country or something, but you wanted to sort of know they were somewhere peaceful and kind of accompanied. There's so much nature here. I feel like somebody was really kind of being looked after in a funny sort of way.
A grave here doesn't have to be attended constantly. It blends in with the wood. It's part of the wood. It's part of the whole. We don't allow people to put fences up around their plot or to, outline it in any way, because it's all part of the wood. Which means that if you haven't been for a while, you might take a little bit longer to find the gravestone, and there may be a few more brambles than you'd like, but it's part of the wood. It doesn't stand out as it would in a, when you've got little boxes next to each other and you've got one that hasn't been mowed. It's a bit different.
So have you got a plot?
I've got a plot. I haven't chosen the place.
Oh, I was going to say, you picked up the best bit first of all.
The most recent one's near the car park that we saw.
Yeah.
I thought that would be a nice place for me.
Yeah.
But, well, I don't actually mind. So long as I'm here somewhere, I don't mind.
So there you have it, the Eternal Forest, one of the most peaceful places I've ever visited, and certainly one of the most stunning woodlands, made all the more special because of those that are resting there. For photos and videos of the forest, visit the link in the show notes or go to the blog page on our website, and to find out more about the Eternal Forest or to support their important work, or even set up something similar, because we need a lot more of these around in the UK, in my view, I'll put their website details in the show notes. And to support my work doing the podcast, you can do that through buymeacoffee.com/thesilentwhy, and that just allows me to keep this podcast going and to help others find their way through loss and grief. And you can find out more about the podcast by following us on social media on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter and Facebook, and there's links in the show notes or at thesilentwhy.com. Thanks for listening. I'm going to end with a quote like we usually do, and this one fits well into life when we're struggling a bit, but I thought it also fits into death in a natural burial ground. Christine Kane said, "Sometimes, when you're in a dark place, you think you've been buried, but actually, you've been planted."